They said Christmas was canceled this year too, broke they claimed too tight to host anything big. I believed them. I swallowed my pride, smiled at my grandkids on video call, and sat quietly in my one-bedroom apartment with the pies I baked anyway, just in case. I had spent 25 years giving my all raising their kids, paying off their mortgage when they nearly lost the house, even cashing out my 401k when my son-in-law got laid off. And yet this Christmas I wasn't even invited. The betrayal wasn't just in their silence, it was in the photos I later saw online. The laughter, the feast, the gathering I paid for without knowing. My name is Irene Wallace and I live in Ohio. This year I made my own list and it ends with freedom. I had already pulled the old tin out of the top cupboard, flour-dusted and dented with love from decades of use. I was going to make the cranberry walnut shortbread my grandchildren always fought over. They used to call it Grandma's snow cookies. I even bought extra cinnamon sticks for the cider, even though they told me Christmas was canceled this year. "It's just not in the budget, Mom," my daughter Diane had said over the phone in her usual clipped tone. Too tight for a big gathering, you understand. I didn't understand, but I said I did. I smiled through the call, said, "Of course, honey, and don't worry about me," even though my voice cracked when I said it. Then I hung up, pressed the phone to my chest, and just sat there in the kitchen while the kettle screamed behind me. That was the beginning of December. I kept hoping it was just a misunderstanding or that they'd call again and say, "Surprise. We were just teasing, come on over." But the days ticked by and my phone remained painfully silent except for one text from my youngest grandson, "Miss you, Grandma." It nearly broke me. The worst part, I believed them. I believed that money was tight, that my daughter and her husband couldn't manage hosting this year. I even offered to help, said I could pitch in for groceries or cook from home and bring dishes. Diane said, "No, Mom. Just rest this year. We'll do something small in the new year." Rest. What exactly was I resting from being forgotten? I didn't realize then that what they meant wasn't Christmas is canceled. What they meant was Christmas is canceled for you. The week before Christmas, I still went grocery shopping. Old habits. I bought a turkey breast for one, some rosemary potatoes, and the ingredients for the snow cookies. I even picked up peppermint marshmallows for the kids just in case they dropped by for hot cocoa. They never did. I didn't want to seem bitter. I didn't want to be that mother, the clingy, guilt-tripping one they whisper about. So I smiled. I knitted. I watched those endless Hallmark movies with their fake snow and perfect endings, sipping cider alone while pretending I chose this peace. But inside, something was rotting. I kept flashing back to the year my son crashed his car, and Diane had a newborn colicky baby. I'd worked double shifts at the pharmacy just to buy everyone gifts that year. I remember wrapping toys in the back room while my legs throbbed and my hands shook with exhaustion. And now all I got was silence. Christmas morning, I woke up to a quiet so loud it made my chest ache. I put on my best green sweater, the one my late husband used to say made my eyes look like mistletoe. I curled my thinning hair. I set out 2 plates, just in case. I ate dinner alone, and still I told myself maybe next year. Maybe they just need time. Maybe I'm being dramatic. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late, around 10 p.m. I was scrolling through Facebook because the silence in the apartment was too heavy. I was searching for joy, for something, anything. A friend from church had posted a photo of her grandkids opening gifts. Another had gone to see the Nutcracker. And then I saw it. A photo. A long table covered in red and gold cloth overflowing with roasted turkey, glazed ham stuffing, and pies. People laughing, toasting wine glasses. My daughter's smile wide and bright, her arm wrapped around her husband. My grandchildren sitting beside a giant Christmas tree. My son holding his baby girl in front of a fireplace. I recognized all too well it was my old home. They were all there, every single one of them, except me. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had excluded me. I clicked through the photos in a daze. One after another, my daughter holding a gift marked "From Grandma," no doubt something I bought last year. My son carving turkey, the same set of knives I gifted him when he got married. My grandkids laughing in the snow wearing the scarves I knitted. It was like watching my own funeral, and no one noticed I wasn't there. I dropped the phone. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat still, hands folded in my lap, heart beating too fast to feel anything but cold. A slow realization crept up my spine like a tide of ice I had been erased, not because I did something wrong, but because I was too easy to ignore, too giving, too accommodating, too convenient. They knew I wouldn't make a fuss, that I'd sit at home with my little cookies and my knitted socks and pretend I wasn't devastated. But I was. And that night, for the first time in decades, I said to myself, no more. No more begging for a place at a table I paid for. No more smiling through disrespect. No more pretending to be the grateful grandmother they toss scraps to when it's convenient. Something inside me hardened, and beneath that, beneath the ache and the quiet devastation, was a flicker, a heat. I remembered something they didn't know I still had. A deed. A cabin. A plan. Irene Wallace, the woman they thought was too old, too quiet, too soft. She was done baking cookies for people who wouldn't even knock. I thought I had already seen the worst of it. The truth that they'd gathered together while I sat alone, that they had celebrated Christmas without so much as a call, a text, or a single ornament sent my way. But I was wrong. The real pain didn't come from being forgotten. It came from the evidence that I was deliberately excluded. It wasn't just one photo. It was an entire album posted by Diane's best friend, someone I once hosted for dinner during a bitter Ohio winter when her heat went out. I saw her tagged in dozens of pictures, and out of reflex I clicked. What stared back at me wasn't just a party. It was a spectacle. A full-blown, decked-out holiday affair. My eyes scanned the decorations, gold-ribboned garlands, white candles in silver holders, napkin rings shaped like reindeer. A table centerpiece I knew was made from my old pinecone craft, set the one Diane had borrowed 2 years ago and never returned. I zoomed in on one photo. There she was. Diane, my daughter. The baby I once rocked through fevers and heartbreaks. Her arms raised in laughter glass of red wine in hand, while my son-in-law kissed her cheek under twinkling fairy lights. Behind her, a banner read, "Merry Christmas, family is everything." Family is everything. I laughed out loud, but it was a sound no one would have recognized, dry, bitter, almost cracked. Family is everything, except when it's me, apparently. Except when the one person who made all their everything possible is suddenly inconvenient. Then came the video. That's what gutted me. A slow pan across the room as my grandson opened a new PlayStation, his face lit up with joy. Everyone clapped. And then I heard it my daughter's voice. "Thanks to all of us for making this year so special," she said. "Even though things were tight, we pulled together." Pulled together. They pulled together by cutting me out. They could have said thanks to Grandma for everything she's done. They could have said she couldn't be here tonight, but we love her. But my name wasn't mentioned. Not once. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a budget issue. This was an erasure. They didn't want me there. Not because I'm difficult. Not because I'd done something wrong. But because I'm easy to leave behind. Because I never demanded anything, never made a fuss, never stopped giving. I was just Grandma Irene, the background character who filled stockings-baked pies and handed over envelopes of emergency money without keeping score. I never asked to be honored, but I never imagined I'd be so discarded. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed phone in hand heart, pulsing behind my ribs like it was trying to break free. At one point, I opened my photo gallery. I found an old picture Christmas 6 years ago. The whole family crowded into my living room. My tree, my cooking, my joy. Diane was pregnant. My son had just gotten a job. They were all laughing. And I was at the center. I stared at that photo and my breath started to shake, because I realized I didn't recognize them anymore. These weren't the children I'd raised. These were strangers with familiar faces. Strangers who had come to expect my love as a given but never offered any back. I finally broke down. Not with sobs, but with that quiet, soul-deep kind of cry that feels like a final release. I cried not just for what they did this year, but for every little moment I had brushed aside. When Diane once told me to just send money next time instead of visiting. When they forgot my birthday last March and said, "Oh, sorry, things were hectic." When my grandson asked me why I lived in such a tiny place and Diane didn't correct him, I saw all of it now like a long movie montage of quiet humiliations, and for the first time in my life I wasn't ashamed to feel angry. Because I had allowed this. I had allowed myself to become the family doormat, clean, dependable, silent. The old woman with kind eyes and a tired smile who never said no and always said, "Of course, sweetheart," but no more. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the back closet and dug out a little brown envelope taped to the underside of a suitcase. Inside was the deed to the Vermont property, our family's old winter cabin. My husband's wedding gift to me, still legally mine. I never told anyone I still owned it. They all assumed we sold it when he passed. I let them believe that. But I kept paying the taxes, quietly, steadily, because a part of me knew someday I might need it. I stared at the yellowed paper in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, my breath slowed. I felt power. Not revenge, not yet, but possibility. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some frail afterthought with a knitting basket and fading memories. I had assets, I had knowledge, and I had nothing left to lose. They had written me out of their holiday, out of their lives, but I still had a pen, and this time I was going to write myself a new story. People think the breaking point comes in a single moment, a slammed door, a cruel sentence, a ruined holiday. But they're wrong. The breaking point is a slow, quiet erosion. 1,000 little sacrifices no one sees, until there's nothing left of you but expectation and exhaustion. After I found those Christmas photos and cried myself into stillness, I sat alone in my chair, the old brown one with the ripped armrest and the sunken cushion, and I thought back to the first time I said yes when I should have said no. It started with diapers. Diane was 19 when she had her first child, and her boyfriend, who later became her husband, was too busy figuring himself out to help. I remember driving 45 minutes every night after my pharmacy shift to rock that screaming baby while she slept. For months, I worked, cooked, changed diapers, and paid their overdue utilities. When I suggested she look for work-from-home options, she burst into tears. So I said, "Don't worry, honey, I'll help." Then it was my son, Alex. He called me at 2 a.m. the year he got his first DUI. I didn't yell. I didn't scold. I drove across town, bailed him out, and paid for the mandatory counseling. He cried in my car, said he'd change. I believed him. He didn't. I cashed out a CD to help him move into his first apartment. Then another one to fix the car he wrecked. Then my pension to help him get back on his feet after losing his job. They were always getting back on their feet, and I was always kneeling down, ready to carry them on mine. I gave Diane and her husband $18,000 to cover their down payment when the housing market crashed. I didn't tell them it was the money I'd saved for a retirement cruise. I let them believe it was an extra fund my late husband had set up. I even wrote a fake letter pretending to find it in his old filing cabinet. Diane cried when I handed it over, and I convinced myself it was worth it. I helped raise their children, mine really in everything but name. I packed lunches, cleaned up after stomach flus, hosted birthday parties, and watched my grandkids fall asleep on my chest while their parents worked late or went out with friends. And I never once asked for credit. Not once. Because I thought that's what love was doing, what needs to be done, no matter the cost. But what I never saw coming, what broke me truly, was how easily they rewrote me out of the picture. Diane would post birthday captions like, "We wouldn't be here without Dad's wisdom," or "grateful for the best husband and father." And I'd stare at those words, knowing I was the one who kept their family afloat through years of instability, medical emergencies, and job loss. But I never got a single mention. Not even when I sold my car to help them pay for braces. Not when I declined medical procedures to save money. Not when I moved out of the family home into this tiny apartment so they could have more space for the kids. And I realize now I trained them. I trained them to believe I had no limits. That I didn't mind. That my life was one long act of service, given without pause or boundary. I taught them that Mom will always be there. Grandma won't mind, she's used to it. She prefers to be alone, she's strong. They called me strong, but what they meant was, she won't break so we don't have to be careful with her. But they were wrong, because I did break. That night, after the photos, I pulled out an old box from the closet, one I hadn't opened in years. It was filled with journals I'd written when the kids were young, letters I never sent, budget ledgers, to-do lists, grocery receipts from the years I lived, paycheck to paycheck. Tucked inside was a small envelope with a photo of me and my husband on our 30th anniversary, standing in front of the Vermont cabin in the snow. I stared at that photo for a long time. Back then, I used to dream of hosting holidays in that cabin. Fireplace crackling, grandkids running up the stairs, hot chocolate bubbling on the stove. It was supposed to be our forever place. After he passed, I couldn't bear to go back, but I also couldn't let it go. So I kept paying the taxes. Quietly, privately, and now I understood why. Because some part of me always knew that I'd need something that was mine, something untouched by their selfishness, untainted by their silence, something they couldn't erase me from. I stood up from that chair and walked to the kitchen, opened my worn notebook, and wrote one word: plan. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew I had to stop being the background character in their story. I had to write my own story now. I'd spent decades sacrificing my future for theirs. Now I was going to reclaim what little time I had left and fill it with people who saw me, valued me, loved me without expecting me to bleed for it. They thought I was broken. They thought I'd never leave. They thought I didn't have anything. But I did. I had a cabin. I had the deed. And most of all, I had nothing left to lose. It started with a pen. A real one, the kind that glides heavy in your hand like it means business. Not a keyboard, not a blinking screen. A pen smooth and firm between my fingers like something ancient and trustworthy. That night, after sitting with my memories and misery, I pulled out my stationery, the floral set Diane gave me 4 Mother's Days ago, probably bought on sale at Walgreens, and I began what I thought would be my goodbye. Dear Diane, I wrote. And then, nothing. The words clogged in my throat, tangled in my chest. How do you say goodbye to someone who's been both your greatest joy and your deepest wound? I closed my eyes and let the years wash over me the first time she said Mama. The scraped knees I kissed the teenage nights I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling until I heard the front door click. I remembered every science fair, every dress hemmed, every plate washed after her family visited and left without offering to help. But I didn't want to write her a letter soaked in grief. I wanted her to feel what I felt. I started again. Dear Diane, you lied to me. You said there would be no Christmas this year. You looked me in the eye and told me there was no money, no plans. But the truth was, there was just no room for me. I paused. Even writing it down, it felt surreal. Me, the woman who once made 6 casseroles and drove through a snowstorm so Diane could host a dinner party. Me, the woman who picked up all the pieces when her marriage was falling apart 3 years ago. Me, the woman who gave them her home. And they had written me out with such ease. I continued writing. It started as grief, then turned into fire. I was never supposed to be permanent, was I? Just the helper, the background, the woman who disappears quietly when she's no longer needed. I filled 3 pages, ripping the words from my heart one by one. My handwriting shook, my jaw clenched. But as the letter stretched on, something shifted. I wasn't just writing to Diane anymore. I was writing for me. By the time I reached the end, I didn't want to mail it. What would be the point? Her silence had already screamed louder than any apology could. Instead, I folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and wrote, "For the record." Then I slid it into the drawer beside my bed. Because what I needed wasn't confrontation. What I needed was action. That night, I stayed up until dawn. A different kind of clarity settled over me, sharp, precise. I wasn't going to wait for someone to love me enough to do the right thing. I was going to love myself enough to stop waiting. I pulled out the file folder I kept with all my legal documents, birth certificate, social security card, power of attorney. Tucked in the back was the deed to the Vermont cabin. Still pristine, still in my name, still untouched. They had no idea I still owned it. Diane thought we sold it after Henry died. I let her think that. She never asked questions. I picked up the phone and dialed someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Howard Brenner said, a tired voice on the other end. My husband's old lawyer. It's Irene, I said. I need your help. There was a long pause. Well, he chuckled. The lioness wakes. We spoke for an hour. I told him I wanted to sell the cabin quietly, off-market, no paper trail connecting it to my family. I told him I needed everything ready within 2 weeks. His silence told me everything he understood. Don't worry, Irene, he finally said. This time you'll have control. After the call, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that shouts or demands. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in choices. The kind that builds in secret, brick by brick, while everyone else is laughing at your silence. I sat back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time I imagined myself at the center of the picture. Not cooking, not giving, not waiting. Just being. I saw myself waking up in a warm bed with snow outside the window. I saw a Christmas table with just enough food, just enough light. Maybe a friend or two, maybe just peace. But most of all, I saw myself smiling, not because I had to, but because I finally chose to. It wasn't revenge I was chasing, it was self-respect. Irene Wallace, the forgotten matriarch from Ohio, was about to become something else entirely, a woman who no longer asked for a seat at the table because she'd built a new one. There's a strange freedom that comes when no one is watching you. For years, I had been under their gaze, measured by how useful I was, how available, how quickly I could fill a void or fix a mess. But now I was invisible to them, and in that invisibility, I moved freely for the first time in decades. They thought I was broken. But I was busy. By New Year's Eve, the contract was signed. My Vermont cabin, the one no one remembered I still had, was under private negotiation with a buyer Howard found through a discreet network of clients. Cash sale, no fuss, no delays. No word would ever make it back to Diane or Alex unless I wanted it to. When I told Howard I didn't want my children to know until it was done, he simply said, "Understood." No judgment, no lecture. Just the legal gears turning finally in my favor. I packed the few documents I needed into a manila folder and stared at the title deed one last time. I remembered the day Henry handed it to me, our anniversary, right before he got sick. He'd said one day when the house is too loud or too quiet, you'll have a place that's just yours. Back then I laughed. Why would I ever need to be alone? But now I understood. The Vermont cabin had been our dream. We'd built it slowly with our own hands and a lot of frozen winters. It was where we planned to grow old together, sip cider by the fire, read books with grandkids on our laps. But after he died, I couldn't bear to return. I told everyone we sold it, even let them believe we lost it to taxes. It was easier that way. And now it was my second chance. I arranged a quick flight and stayed overnight in the little town nearby. The cabin still stood strong wooden beams weathered, but proud the porch intact snow piled softly on the roof. I unlocked the door and stepped inside to the scent of pine and memory. Dust layered the furniture, but the space held a warmth that hadn't faded. A few old quilts, the chipped mug Henry always used, a photo of us taped to the side of the fridge, and right in the drawer where I left it a folded piece of paper, the cabin rules written in Henry's scrawl. No working, no crying, no company unless they bring pie. I smiled for the first time in weeks. I spent the night there alone, and not lonely. The fire crackled as I sipped cocoa wrapped in the same old shawl I wore when I was newly married. For a moment, I wasn't anyone's mother or grandmother or giver. I was just Irene. By morning, the decision was sealed. The buyer made a fair offer more than I expected. Enough to buy me a new home far from Ohio and still have plenty left over. Not enough to make the papers, but enough to make me feel rich in peace and autonomy. On the flight home, I didn't sleep. I watched the clouds and thought about all the things I'd given up, not just money, but time, identity, purpose. I'd spent my whole adult life in service of a family who now couldn't be bothered to send a thank you card. And it hit me like a wave. They didn't think I had anything left. They thought I was spent, that the well had run dry, that all I had left was an empty apartment, old knitting needles, and maybe a few Social Security checks. They were wrong. I had this property. I had a solid buyer, and I had one final card to play. When I got back to Ohio, I went straight to the post office. I mailed myself a certified copy of the closing agreement. Then I wrote 3 checks to myself. One for a moving service, one for a new wardrobe, and one marked simply for the first fresh start of my life. Back home, I began the quiet process of leaving. I called a realtor friend, someone Diane had once mocked for being too loud, and told her I was looking for a coastal town, someplace warm, quiet, where no one knew my last name. She said, "You deserve it." Those words echoed. Not "you earned it," not "you can afford it," but "you deserve it." No one in my family had said that to me. Ever. I packed up my apartment slowly, room by room. I boxed the Afghans I'd knitted for Diane's kids, the photos no one asked to borrow the letters from Henry, and a single photo of my kids back when their eyes still searched for mine. Everything else I left behind, and then I did something I'd never done before I hired a professional to clean up after me. Because I was done cleaning up after everyone else. They didn't know the cabin existed. They didn't know I sold it. They didn't know I was about to vanish from the narrative. Let them wonder where I went. Let them feel the absence they built brick by brick with their neglect, because by the time they came looking, if they ever did, I would be gone. And for once, they'd be the ones on the outside staring through the window wondering how they ended up excluded from my life. It started with a phone call I didn't answer, then another, then 10 more in the same week. At first, I thought maybe someone had gotten hurt. Maybe Alex was in the hospital again, or Diane's youngest had another allergic reaction. My heart, trained for decades to leap at every emergency, fluttered with instinctive panic. I almost picked up, but then I saw the voicemail transcript. "Hey, Mom. Can you call me back when you have a second? Something weird showed up in the mail." I froze. That weird something was the notice Howard had sent, a routine legal document required to notify potential heirs of the cabin's sale. Though the deed had always been mine, Howard advised me to officially clear any assumed rights by sending out formal disclosures just in case they ever tried to contest it down the line. I never expected them to actually read the mail, but apparently they did. 2 days later, Diane was on my doorstep. She didn't knock like usual, not the light, polite taps of a daughter dropping by. No, she banged, hard, like someone who felt entitled to answers. I opened the door slowly, arms crossed, heart quiet. I had nothing to prove. She was breathless, cheeks flushed, her voice already raised. "Mom, what is this about the Vermont property I thought we sold that years ago?" I said nothing. She blinked, confused by my silence. I just got a legal notice saying it's been sold." "How is that even possible? You didn't even tell me you still had it." I tilted my head. "Why would I?" Her mouth dropped open. "I mean, I thought it was gone. I thought you needed help when you moved into this apartment." I smiled politely. "You thought wrong." She stood in my doorway, stunned, and for the first time in years, I didn't invite her in. Instead, I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The late winter air was biting, but I barely noticed, because for the first time I was holding the power, and she felt it. Diane fumbled for words. We could have used that money, you know. The kids' tuition, the mortgage." I cut her off with a calm hand. "You canceled Christmas," I said softly. "You lied and said it was too expensive, and then you hosted a gathering I wasn't invited to with decorations I once owned and recipes I taught you." "That wasn't," she stammered. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." She looked away, suddenly small. I wanted to hate her in that moment. I wanted to shout, "Where were you when I cried myself to sleep? Where were you when I broke my back for your bills?" But I didn't, because I no longer needed her to understand. I just needed her to feel it. "You excluded me," I said. "And now you're surprised I moved on without telling you. Isn't that what you wanted?" Diane's eyes welled with tears, but I had seen those tears before weaponized softness. Temporary guilt. "I didn't think you'd actually go behind our backs, Mom." I let out a quiet laugh. "Behind your backs, Diane, I wasn't even on your radar. That's the point." She opened her mouth to respond, but I stepped closer. "I've spent my whole life cleaning up after your messes, giving you everything I had, even when it meant stealing from myself. I sold my future to fund yours. But now," I said, raising my chin, "now I'm giving something back to me." She looked stunned. "But where will you go?" "That's for me to know," I said. "You'll figure it out like I always had to." The next day, Alex called. "Mom," he sighed, "can we talk? I didn't know about the cabin. I would have helped you sell it properly, made sure the family got something out of it." I almost laughed. "Did you help me when I sold my car to cover your rehab fees?" I asked. "Or when I skipped my knee surgery so you could fix your plumbing?" He fell silent. "You all thought I had nothing left," I said. "So you treated me like nothing. Now you realize I still have something, and suddenly I matter." "Mom, come on, that's not fair." Neither was being alone on Christmas. Click. I hung up. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was free. For weeks, they kept trying. Emails, calls, long guilt-laden text messages. We were just stressed. You've been distant lately. Can't we just talk this out? The kids miss you. I responded once with a photo. Me, on the porch of the Vermont cabin holding a mug of cider snow falling around me. No caption, no explanation. Just the image of me, happy, alone, and unapologetic. And suddenly the messages stopped. They didn't know where I was moving. They didn't know what I planned next. And for once, they were the ones left in the dark. I had become the unanswered call, the unopened door, the silence that echoed louder than any scream. And it felt divine. The house I chose wasn't grand. It wasn't beachfront, and it didn't come with a gated community or sweeping marble floors. But it was mine. A white cottage tucked into a coastal Carolina town where the sun rose soft over the pines and the air smelled like salt and new beginnings. There was a porch swing, a hummingbird feeder, enough space for peace, but not enough for guests who came out of guilt. It took me exactly 1 month to settle in. By spring, I was already walking the neighborhood trails, attending local book club meetings, and sipping sweet tea with a neighbor who reminded me of who I used to be before the sacrifices, before the silence, before I became invisible in my own life. That year when Christmas rolled around, I felt no ache, no panic, no hope they might call, no bitterness in my chest. I baked the snow cookies for myself. 1 batch, no leftovers. I hung 3 ornaments on a small tree. I played old records and lit a candle not out of obligation, but as an offering to a woman who had clawed her way back into her own story. And then on Christmas Eve it happened. A knock, soft, hesitant. When I opened the door there, she was Diane, standing on my porch in a heavy coat hair, slightly wind-blown eyes, full of exhaustion and something else regret. "I found you," she whispered. I didn't smile, but I stepped aside. She came in slow, like someone who knew she didn't deserve to. For a while, we didn't speak. She stared at the tree. I poured 2 cups of cocoa. We sat. And then she broke. Tears, the real kind this time. Not performative, not weaponized. "I was cruel," she said, voice barely audible. "I don't even know why. You've always given us everything. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing you." I nodded slowly. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. But I had already. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed to set myself free too. "I forgive you," I said, "but I'm not coming back." Her head snapped up. "This isn't a punishment," I continued. "It's a choice. I spent my whole life giving and staying and waiting to matter, and now that I've finally found a quiet, joyful life, I won't trade it back for guilt." She wiped her face and gave the smallest, most broken laugh. "I don't blame you." We talked a little longer. She told me the kids missed me, that Alex was finally going to therapy, that she and her husband realized they'd become entitled and selfish. That Christmas morning when I didn't show up, their daughter had asked, did we forget Grandma again? The truth had begun unraveling them. "I'm not angry anymore," I told her, "but I won't be Grandma the way I used to be. Not the one who gives until she disappears." Diane nodded. "What does that mean?" "It means if you want me in your life, it'll be on my terms." She stayed for just an hour. Before she left, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. She slipped something onto the counter, a hand-knit scarf. Sloppy, uneven, but lovingly made. "I tried," she said with a sad smile. "It's harder than it looks." I let her go. And that night, for the first time in my entire adult life, I celebrated Christmas on my own terms. Not in bitterness, not in revenge, but in quiet triumph. I put on my softest robe. I opened a letter from a neighbor inviting me to New Year's brunch. I sipped cider with a cinnamon stick and curled under the handmade quilt from the Vermont cabin. And I whispered to Henry's photo on the mantel. "You were right. One day I'd need a place that's just mine." Irene Wallace, the woman who once gave everything away, was now a woman who lived gently, loved wisely, and answered to no one but herself. Yes, they came back. Yes, they said sorry. And yes, I forgave them. But I didn't return. Because sometimes forgiveness is letting go, and freedom is choosing not to stay.